In the last video, I started out with a massive 517-pound slab of steel. I rough cut it with an oxyacetylene torch, dropped it on a milling machine, and then machined the overall profile of the blade. As of right now, she's soaking in a nice acid bath, so let's go ahead and get right back into it. So this has been marinating for about 24 hours. And I just happened to walk out here to check this out and thought this was somewhat interesting. You can actually see the mill scale lifting off, complete with the writing on it and everything. Yeah, that's as close as I can get. You can see it's actually floating on the surface of the vinegar. Not attached, but it's like perfectly complete. Funny, huh? Alright, day 2 of the vinegar bath. Actually getting fairly murky now. I love that you can see the perfect outline of the sword. All the bubbles and debris and everything just kind of stay right in line with the profile of the sword instead of, you know, dispersing throughout the whole solution. Alright, one of the rare times it's actually daylight outside. But this has been sitting here for about 3 days. I would say we are done. I'm gonna take some of the vinegar out of here so I can get the magnet on there, and then we're gonna lift it up and get this thing all cleaned off. Alright, so I've been in here for an hour or two setting this all up. I think I've got everything aligned and ready for my first cut. Now, I had to angle that head to match the angle of the bevel, but if you look here, there's a protractor on the side of the head. We've got 0, 10 degrees, 20 degrees, and this is the reference mark. And you'll see I'm literally missing the little notches just for these few degrees, right where I need it. So what I'm gonna do is use this digital angle finder. I'm gonna stick this right on the table. I'll zero this out. Okay, let's make sure 0 degrees, and then I'll just stick it on the side of this cutter here. And we've got 71 degrees, which is, you know, 90 degrees minus 19. It's just the orientation there, but we are dead on to what we need. So I'm gonna take my first test pass here and hope the machine doesn't blow up. Alright, it cuts. I just gotta reposition the cutter. Need to back it that way. Alright, so I didn't film this because I was doing a ton of trial and error, probably 6-7 hours of work, but this cutter ended up being way too big for this vertical head, so I ended up using this cutter, which is about 1/3 the size, to do kind of like 3 chunks of removal, and then I came back and just cleaned it up with this one, so I ended up with a nice, you know, smooth, uniform surface before there were tiny little steps between each cut. I think it came out pretty well. You can see I'm not right on the line here, but I hand scribed these lines, and they're honestly probably not super accurate. I took the liberty of actually measuring the depth of this bevel. My goal was 2.88 inches, and this is what I came up with. So I'm slightly shy, 15,000ths of an inch, maybe 3 or 4 human hairs. So I'm calling it good. Chances are any error is due to the fact that this head is probably not angled at the perfect angle. That digital angle finder I had was accurate to, you know, 1/10 of a degree, maybe 2/10 of a degree. So I'm calling this good. It looks pretty good. And it's kind of starting to look like something. All right, so it's time to reposition the blade so I can do this next section of cut here. And I'll use the little cutter and then clean up with that cutter. And it'll probably take me a couple days, but cue up the 1 minute long time lapse. Okay, so I know I said there'd be a time lapse, but there is a slight major problem here. As you can see, I have moved the workpiece over so I can start the cut here, but there's no clamping surfaces available. I cannot get a clamp on this anywhere. Now, the only solution I could come up with would be to push the workpiece towards the machine, thus exposing one of these T-slots so I can actually clamp the thing down. The problem is the cutter's in the way, so I could theoretically move this whole ram backwards, except this vertical head is hitting that clutch lever, so that limits my travel. Further complicating matters, I discovered that this surface that I just machined is not perfectly flat. Here, let me show you. Here, I've just got a little cheapy straight edge on here, but I think you can see that there's light right in the middle of that cut. It's kind of a slightly dished cut, and the reason for that is this head got knocked slightly off center, so the front of the cutter is digging in a little bit more than the rest, thus making a slight depression right in the middle. And if we look at the protractor on the side of the machine here, you can see the 0 right there, and the 0 on this is slightly off. That's all it takes. And earlier I accidentally ran the cutter into a big cut too quickly, and I must have just knocked the machine out very slightly. So I basically had to go through this really painstaking process of aligning this entire head in the, in front to back and side to side, then set the 19-degree angle again. And if I'm gonna do all that, I might as well just reposition the whole thing, flip it over here so the head's on this side. That way I can push this whole thing back and not hit that clutch lever. So I'll be back in an hour or two. Yeah. Alright, so immediately after that last clip of machining the bevel, I ran into some major issues with this machine. I was unable to traverse the table back after completing those passes, and needless to say, it has been several months since that time. I required complete disassembly of the machine. I had to fabricate new parts. I had to completely rewire the machine from scratch. On and on and on and on. Alright, so long story short, I'm not going to be utilizing this machine. So this is the machine that I'm going with to finish the bevels on the blade. It is a much more robust version of the other machine, and it has a much higher weight capacity, and I think it can solve all my problems. This is a 1941 Cincinnati No. 2 horizontal milling machine. Now, she weighs about 6,500 pounds. She's got 5 horsepower and hopefully enough grunt to do this sword. I spent the last 5, almost 6 months, a couple hundred hours, couple $1,000 getting this machine up and running. I've got it retrofit with a digital readout out there. I've got some lighting, and I've got this additional table on here. If I kind of squat down here, you can see this is the original table here, right? It ends right at this point, and you can see the bolts that are holding this other table on. Now this is what they call a sign plate.
So the neat thing about this table is it's got these like arms here. You can see it locks with a nut here and it rotates here. And so that means the whole table can lift up like this. And then when the cutter comes in, it's coming in at the angle, and you can use that to cut your bevel.
I actually got this from a locomotive factory, if you can believe. This thing is absolutely enormous. I'd say it weighs 1,000 pounds or so. It's 100% cast iron. and it is very old. Definitely quite a score for doing pretty much any blade that I'll ever come across in the future. All right, now if I back up over here, you can see how I'm gonna safely load the blade on this machine. I've got a new gantry crane, and I'll use the lifting magnet to pick up the blade and drop it onto this table. The other nice thing is I will use that crane. I'll stick this thing in here. Look at that, it even has a nice little cutout so I can get this in here. So I can stick this in here, and then I can use the crane to lift the table up to the appropriate angle. I mean, this top plate weighs at least 500 pounds, plus the sword on top of it, so it would be pretty tricky to get it into position otherwise. Oh yeah, and one other thing I did is I machined these kind of standoffs, or maybe you call them a stop. Basically the idea is I can slide these in the slots on the front. Now these slots are precision machined, and I can put them all in a row down there, and then I can slide the blade up against them so that it basically will allow the edge of the blade to be perfectly aligned with the slot. The slot, it has been perfectly aligned with the travel of this table, so setup time is dramatically reduced. I actually cut these all out of the same piece of material that was machined to a consistent size, so they will all offset the blade exactly the same amount all the way down. Plus, this way when I have the table at an angle and I've got a heavy blade on there, I can just kind of slide it along all the stops instead of trying to like reposition this 300-pound piece of steel that's precariously hanging like that and then clamp it, and it's just gonna be a complete nightmare. I mean, honestly, it would be impractical to do without these stops. So this was well worth the effort to design and implement these. So final note about these things, I had to make them slightly smaller than the slot. I mean, there needs to be some level of clearance so that you can slide them, right? But I don't want them to have any wiggle, right? You can see you can move that around, and then potentially there would be some amount of error among all of them. So what I did is I drilled a hole slightly off center in all of them. The idea being when you twist it, it kind of acts like a cam and it wedges itself into the slot, and then no movement whatsoever. All right, so that was a lot of talking, a lot of explaining. Let's get that blade on there and let's make our first cut. No joke, I have not tested this. I'm gonna throw the blade on there and I'm gonna cut it for the very first time right now. Alright, that wasn't too bad. You can see all I had to do was just kind of push it up against my stops, and I'm instantly aligned everywhere I need to be. Let me get this thing positioned side to side, and I'll get it clamped down, and then I'll show you raising it up. Alright, so as you can see, I got this all clamped down, but I sort of discovered a problem here. I don't have very effective clamping. Ideally, you'd want the bolt at this end, so it's pulling down on the clamping point and providing a lot of pressure. But obviously with this distance, I can't do that. It's actually even worse over here. And same thing over here. Now I have the T-slot nice and close, but I can't clamp on the bevel. So again, I gotta reach really far. I put 4 of them on there. Hopefully that's enough. And I have 2 good ones down here. This is how it should look. You can see, again, the bolt is pulling down right on the end, providing a ton of clamping force, you know, right on the nose of this clamp. So hopefully between the 6 of them, it'll hold it. But I really need to come up with a better plan for that for the future. Alright, so it is literally like 2 hours later, and I think I finally got this at the right angle. The reason it's so difficult is I'm trying to pick up the angle of the bevel that I've already machined so that I can continue machining it and it'll all match. The problem is, you know, how to do that accurately, especially with such a heavy piece. What I've done is I've taken this empty tool holder here. It had a nice machined face on the front of it, which you really can't see because I don't have enough room. But the idea is I took an adjustable parallel, which is this thing, often called a planar gauge. Basically the 2 sides of it are flat and parallel to each other. and you just slide this piece up and down to make it wider and shorter. So I just kind of kept sticking it in that gap there, moving the table very slightly, sticking it in the gap there, you know, over and over and over. And then I overshot the angle and I had to drop it back down and then start over again. So it just kind of went on and on and on forever. But I'll show you what I mean here. Pretty tight, but you can see if I wedge this in here, it doesn't even fall, it doesn't wiggle at all. I've got it pressed up against the face of the tool holder there and the angle of the bevel, the previously machined bevel. So I guess we'll call that good. And if it's not perfect, I'm guessing it'll be close enough to, you know, hand modify it, basically kind of blend it all in so it looks the same. Back here on the other side of the plate, this is how I raised it kind of slowly and relatively accurately, just this bottle jack here. I tried using these little screw jacks, but they're just kind of too wimpy. I may pick up some heavier duty version of these and use them in place of this. This worked pretty well, but it's just not great for fine adjustment. And if you go too far, you have to back it off quite a bit to kind of reset, and then you just start all over again. So extremely annoying. I've got some digital angle finders. These were helpful for at least, you know, getting me in the ballpark, but they're not super accurate, and they were really hard to kind of fit in that space too. So it didn't really work out that great, but live and learn. We're getting there. Oh, and I just spotted this. This is a slight problem here. The bolt is nice and bent. The amount of force it takes to lift this thing must be much higher than I thought it is. This is a 5/8 inch bolt on a lifting eye, so I didn't think it would really bend, but you know, here we are. Alright, I'm getting there. I'm just about to set up this cut, and I discovered that this lever here, the clutch engagement, hits the damn sword, so I'm gonna take it off and reorient it, I guess. Just another little detail that I have to work through, like a million others. Alright, so it is now the next day, and I just wanted to show you an example of how the simplest things can be extremely frustrating. I wanted to switch this lever around, as I previously mentioned, and I cannot. Like, I got the bolt loose, it's just floating around in there, and the shaft itself is loose, but I cannot separate them. I've tried everything. You can see the paint is missing over here because I was using pipe wrenches to try to pull it off. I tried hammering this thing out of here. It does not go anywhere. I can only think that the bolt is bent, and that's why I can't actually pull it all the way out of the hole no matter what. But I went with the simple solution, which is I just torched the hell out of it and then manually bent it the right way. It's a hack job, and I'm not a fan, but I really didn't want to spend the rest of my life trying to figure out how to get this stupid lever off there. So here we are. I pull the lever down. This is actually as low as it goes. It does not contact anything, so mission accomplished. Alright, so we've got the tool touched off here. I think you can see little scrape marks. That's on the original cut where it's basically perfect, so right where I want to be. And I'm going to kind of clean up all this, you know, all these steps from the previous milling. Hopefully it'll match up, but it should take me out to right here. It'll only take 1 or 2 passes, but I wanted to do a light cut to start with, you know, just to test out this whole thing. I have no idea how rigid the setup. I don't know if these supports are rigid, you know, the whole thing. So we'll see how it goes. We'll take it slow, go shallow, and then we'll kind of keep ramping it up over time.
Approximately 10 hours later.
Alright, so I've sort of skipped ahead here. I've done the machining on the 2 large bevels, you know, excluding the tip here. I haven't done the underside at all, but I was basically trying to dial in the machine, make little adjustments here and there for each section, and I've kind of slowly improved the cutting speed and efficiency and also the surface finish. And I feel like I have it pretty well dialed in here, so I'm gonna resume the video at this point, I suppose. Semi-interesting side note, but this section is a section that was cut several months ago, I think about 7 months ago now, at the beginning of the video. And then you can see where I kind of had to pick up the cut with the new milling machine right here. And you can almost kind of see the journey here. Very rough cutting. You can see all kind of marks. It feels fairly smooth, but it is, you know, that's just a really ugly surface finish. And I'm just trying to get the speeds right, trying to get the feed rate correct, get my clamping correct. I was experimenting with different cutters and everything. This is the second section. You can see it is getting much better. It feels very smooth now. There's a little bit of roughness here and there. I was actually pushing the machine a little too hard at this point, and you can kind of see, I can't really tell in the viewfinder, but it's got this weird like dimple look to it that's caused by chatter. It's just when you're pushing the cutter too hard, it'll kind of vibrate very slightly and it'll leave this ugly finish. And we finally come down to the last section that I milled, and you can see I've gotten it pretty close. That looks pretty nice. There are scratches in there, and that is simply a matter of one of the teeth on this cutter got a chip in it. So it just kind of left this somewhat unsightly finish. Unsightly finish. It feels like glass though, so I think we're 95% of the way there. Now speaking of cutters, since I had to kind of break down this whole setup so that I can flip the sword over, I took the cutter out of the spindle, and that's when I discovered that I had a chipped tooth. But I've been getting this sort of, I don't know, kind of a clicking sound sometimes, and a little bit more vibration than I would like. Now, this is an old arbor here, or shank if you prefer. Got some rust on it. I've got a the cheapest Chinese cutter head possible. Now, these teeth are actually very high quality, but they're really the wrong one for this application. These are what I use for cutting hardened steel. So I just kind of bit the bullet and spent some real cash, and I've got this thing now. It's the same size, same format, it takes the same teeth, but I've got a brand new arbor. I've got a much higher quality cutter head. This is Toolmex, I believe, made in Poland. And you can actually kind of see how much beefier it is. Like this section here is just so much taller and thicker and heavier. And one of the weird things about this is it has unevenly spaced teeth. I don't know if you can really see, but they're not all the same distance apart. You can see like this one is a very short bit here, but then it's much longer over here. And that's kind of designed to eliminate vibration and such. And hopefully that kind of helps me out there. Finally, I've got some brand new carbide inserts. These are the cutting teeth themselves. And these are really designed for heavy cutting of, you know, more standard steel. So I'm thinking with this whole package, hopefully I'll have eliminated the last of my noise and vibration issues. And I'm honestly curious, you know, what kind of difference it really makes. But I guess we'll find out very shortly. Oh yeah, one last thing here. I'm gonna film most of the setup for the second side of the sword, just to kind of show you the process and how much work is involved and all of the improvements I've sort of made along the way. The whole thing is 5 times more difficult than doing a smaller sword, so I just thought it might be slightly interesting to the 3 machinists that actually watch these videos. Alright, so first things first, I literally just have to flip this thing around. It's not a super easy task. There's no really easy way to do it, nothing really to grab with the hoist or anything, so I tend to just kind of flip it by hand, and hopefully I don't drop this on my feet. Getting much easier to slide now. Ugh. Starting to actually lose some weight. right, so as you can see, I have articulated the table as far to the left as possible. This is the limit right here. And then what I do is I just slide the sword until it's just gonna clear the cutter. The idea is to have the cutter spinning and it will enter the workpiece here with relatively minimal loss of, you know, travel of the table. Table can travel 28 inches at a time, so I'm gonna have to move this workpiece and re-clamp it and everything 3 times to get it all the way to the end of that bevel over there. So I'm trying to minimize that amount of work as possible. And as a result, you can see a significant part of the sword hangs off the edge, which is extremely terrifying. It's pretty tippy, but it stays, as you can see. I'm trying to leave the thick part of the sword, the widest part on the table, to kind of act as a counterbalance. It'll be fine once it's all clamped, but obviously it's nerve-wracking as you're handling this 400-pound piece of plate steel. Alright, so next step is I take these stops that I fabricated earlier, and I'm just gonna, you know, slide them in here. And then I'll get, you know, maybe 3 of them on there, and I'll push the plate right up against it so that it's registered against the stops, and then I know the edge of this blade is more or less perfect with the travel of the table, so it'll make a nice straight cut without too much fidgeting with a 400-pound hunk of steel. So this is kind of a traditional milling clamp. It's commonly called a strap clamp. But basically you set it up, you clamp on this end, and you got these little kind of risers, and you just tighten this bolt, right? And it's just gonna pull this end down and give you a pretty fair amount of clamping force. But I just wasn't a fan. I feel like these are a little too little for this sort of job. So I came up with these. I had some of this 1/4 inch thick wall, 2-inch square tubing, and I just drilled some holes. And as you can see, it allows me to clamp with a great amount of clamping area, but also safety, meaning if something ever happens, the sword is going to have a real hard time falling down and landing on my feet, basically, because even if these are finger tight, right, the sword cannot come out of there. So no matter what the situation is, I try to have at least one of these on here just to make me feel better, I guess. Oh, I nearly forgot. So if you remember, this is my old lifting eye, and it bent pretty well the first time I used it. So I spent a few dollars and I got a proper swiveling lifting eye here, and this thing is rated for 4,000 pounds, so I think it'll go much better. Alright, I've got the table lifted pretty high. It's kind of precarious because once it gets to a certain point, the weight of the blade wants to swing this whole thing forward and smack into that cutter, so I kind of have to hold on to it while it's raising, and it's terrifying. So this is what I've done to set the height. I took off the original top and I ground this down, and I put a hole in the bottom of this, and I also carved this off for clearance. You'll see here, but you can see I had to clearance that edge. So basically, the reason why I taped this is because I just wanted to not move at all. If this rotates, it's gonna increase or decrease the height. But I already have it set exactly where I want it. So I'm just gonna do this. I'm gonna drop the table right on this thing, and then I'll know that the angle of the plate is exactly as it has been for every other cut. All right, let's see here. Almost. I think it's just stuck, and I have to just go like that. You couldn't see what I did. I just kind of grabbed it and moved it down. I think it was just bound up a little bit. Can't move this thing, so it's got all the pressure on it. So we're looking pretty good. Next step is to basically clamp all these things in place, these kind of side arms here, and you know, to add some rigidity. I'll go put the camera back in the tripod for that. All right, we're looking pretty good here. The thing is still nice and secure. I know we have the correct angle. I tightened the hell out of these things. Now, I ended up adding a second bolt here. Previously, there was just this one bolt, and it was right in the center, and I kind of figured that may have acted as like a pivot point, so to speak, and allowed some sort of flexing. And so doing it this way with two bolts, I can move the clamping loads closer to the edges and also kind of eliminate that pivot point. I don't know if it actually does anything, but what are you gonna do? This is probably the weak point of this. You know, this is 1/2 inch thick, but there's quite a bit of material cut out in the middle here, and it's probably just not as rigid as it could be. Now, I have considered upgrading these, maybe fabricating some new ones, maybe out of some, you know, thicker material, maybe 50% or even 100% thicker, or using a hardened alloy. I'm guessing these are probably just mild steel and they're pretty flimsy, but I figure by the time I actually fabricate these and so on and so forth, I could have finished the blade. Quick note while I'm editing this video, a month later I did in fact end up getting new brackets laser cut out of some much beefier heat-treated chromoly steel. Massive improvement in rigidity compared to the old ones. Alright, that's plenty of explaining. Let's get on with the time lapse. Alright, I just wanted to mention something real quick here. You can see this massive pile of chips. It's kind of hard to gauge how much is really there. If you look, this is, you know, the way, this is the part that this whole saddle rests on and moves on. So it continues out the other side, and it's right about here. So that's quite a mountain of chips that are piling up. But the fascinating thing to me is just how hot this is. If you look at the color of these, I would say this is 600 or 700 degrees Fahrenheit. And even with this kind of thin glove on, like, I can't really put my hand too close. It's like a campfire or something like that, like a smoldering campfire. The amount of radiant heat is absolutely insane. And you can see how it's just kind of cascading down onto the machine and the floor and so forth. So it's actually melting the soles of my shoes. You can kind of see here, they're all embedded in there. And it makes it extremely slippery because it's a smooth concrete floor and I'm walking on, you know, smooth metal chips basically. So I've almost fallen several times. Just a little insight into the life of a machinist, things that you wouldn't really consider. All right, so here she is. This is all the large bezels machined, top and bottom. They look pretty good. I've kind of half-assed measured them and they're within, I think, 30 thousandths of an inch, side to side, top to bottom. That's 0.75 millimeters. I would say that's pretty good considering the scale of this thing. I've got these kind of rough spots here where, you know, I transition from one cut to the next, but there's nothing really there. You can't really even see anything, or rather feel anything. It's just, you can see the difference in the cut, but I'll blend this all together. It'll look very uniform, but I gotta do these little tiny bevels just at the tip here. And I was just realizing if I use my little standoffs over there to, you know, line this up, the majority of the sword, because it's so long, is actually gonna be hanging out the table, which is gonna be a slight problem trying to get this thing in place. I can't really hold a, you know, 350, 400 pound piece of steel while I'm clamping it down. So it's getting really late. I'm gonna ponder this a little bit and I will come back to it tomorrow. What do you think there, girl? Okay. So I heard to be a real YouTuber, you gotta pimp your merch in every single video. So here we are. I paid a really excellent artist to make me some 80s inspired PHM designs, and she gave me 4 of them. I was gonna pick one, but honestly I like them all, so here they are. I got this one right here. I've got this one as well. Very nice. I really like the color scheme on this one, but I think this one's my favorite. It's kind of got like Outrun / Motley Crue vibes. Definitely right in my wheelhouse. Alright, that's it. See you in the next part.